Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to this, the first meeting of the Welfare Reform Committee of 2013, and can I wish everyone in the room this morning a very happy new year. Hope you all had a very good break. But we have to go straight to the business of this morning, so can I remind everyone to please switch off the mobile phones and electronic devices so that we don't have any interruptions unnecessarily. The first item of business that we have this morning is our passported benefits consultation. We're going to take evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure Investment and Cities on the Scottish Government's proposals for passported benefits. So I'd like to welcome the Cabinet Secretary, wish her a particularly happy new year, and ask her to make some introductory comments, after which the committee will then discuss or ask questions of the Cabinet Secretary. You're very welcome, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, for the invitation to be here today, and a very happy new year to you and to members of the committee as well. I welcome this opportunity today to update the committee on two things essentially. Firstly, the findings of the consultation that we had on passported benefits, and secondly, to give an update as far as I'm able today on the progress that we're making on putting in place arrangements for passported benefits when the UK welfare reforms start to be implemented from April this year. I think the committee is well aware by now that the very strong view of the Scottish Government is that the UK reforms are coming too deep and too fast. We disagree with some of the changes that the UK Government are making. And of course, these reforms are coming against the backdrop of some of the biggest cuts that we have seen to the welfare system in a generation. Just yesterday, we saw child benefits start to be removed from many people. We estimate that will affect almost 100,000 people across Scotland. And of course, today, the UK Government presses ahead with plans to put a cap on increases to benefits, including the benefits for many people who are working hard in low-paid jobs. And we would estimate that the cap on benefits, including tax credits, will affect around 700,000 working households across Scotland. So clearly these are changes with a big impact in Scotland, and I think they will cause more pain for some of the most vulnerable people and families across our society who are already struggling to cope and of course already working very hard. So that's our view, as the committee is aware, and as the committee is also aware, the Government is committed to doing as much as we can to mitigate the impact of these changes. I want to turn now though to our consultation firstly and talk initially about the responses to that consultation. The committee is aware that we published the analysis of the consultation on the 21st of December, and I understand a copy of that was made available to the committee at the time. In summary, respondents want to see a system of passported benefits that is easy to administer, inclusive and flexible, offering fairness and equity of access for all, and that chimes very much with the findings of the consultation events that we held in October last year, and in the long term is what we hope to achieve. Obviously, though, our immediate focus and the immediate focus of many of those responding to the consultation is on maintaining access to passported benefits for those who already access them, and the consultation was very useful in that regard, as it showed overall support for continuing to use the benefit system as a means of passporting. Also gave us insights into issues that we might want to consider in the medium term as we review how passported benefits are interacting with universal credit and personal independence payments as we move forward. The analysis brought out a number of key themes. One of the main concerns raised by respondents was protecting entitlement for individuals who currently receive passported benefits. I've already mentioned that, and that's an issue that I've been very clear about in previous appearances here at the committee and in the consultation document itself. We emphatically do not see the need for new qualifying criteria for passported benefits as an opportunity to cut budgets or reduce the numbers of people who can claim passported benefits. That then, I think, takes me neatly on to the second issue I wanted to update on today, and that is the progress on revised criteria for passported benefits. You'll recall that when I last appeared to discuss this issue in October last year, there was considerable uncertainty regarding the information that will be available on Universal Credit Award notifications, and that has implications for how we set criteria for income-based passported benefits for the short term. We now have some more information from DWP on what information will be available and in what format that will be available. There was also some further detail provided in the Universal Credit Regulations published on the 10th of December and in the Chancellor's Autumn Statement. And that additional information, I think it's fair to say, gives me some more comfort that we could be in a position to set revised criteria in time for the launch of Universal Credit in October, and I am keen and minded to do so if we can. But we will keep that position under review because there is more information that we still require. And of course the fallback position, depending to some extent not just on the information we have but on the numbers likely to be on Universal Credit in the period between October this year and April next year, the fallback position would be to continue with the interim Pathfinder arrangements and set revised criteria in time for April next year. So in summary, we intend to bring forward legislation in February which will allow for Universal Credit to be used as a qualifying criterion for income-based passported benefits for the Pathfinder period between April and October this year. It will include criteria for disability-related passported benefits to account for the introduction of personal independence payments, and it will make other changes to non-passported benefit pieces of legislation that require consequential amendments due to UK government welfare reforms. Legislation governing the period from October onwards will be introduced around June or July if we decide to set the revised criteria in time for October. That, of course, will be later if we decide to keep the interim arrangements in place for a longer period of time, and I'll keep the committee fully advised of our thinking and our ultimate decision on that issue. Just briefly, before I conclude, Convener, if I can turn to the issue of disability-related passported benefits. We have, because obviously the timescale for personal independence payments introduction is different to that for Universal Credit. We've in principle decided on our approach to student loan exemptions and on the personal independence payment passporting criteria for blue badge parking, which we believe most closely matches the current higher rate mobility component of DLA. However, the lack of final information from DWP has hampered final confirmation of the passporting arrangements for blue badges, but we're fairly well advanced now in our deliberations on that. We, however, do need to do some further modelling regarding the National Concessionary Travel Scheme before we can finalise our approach to the new passporting criteria, and we're pressing the DWP for information which will allow us to do this. And I'll be very happy to write to the committee with the confirmed positions on those issues when they're available. But I am reasonably confident at this stage that we'll be able to come to a settled position on these matters soon. So in summary, I think we're in a slightly stronger position regarding the continuation of passporting arrangements as we move towards the introduction of PIP and Universal Credit, although some significant uncertainty still remains, and we continue to press DWP for as much information as possible. We can't mitigate all of the impacts of welfare reform. DWP's own impact assessment made clear that a key aim of the introduction of PIP, for example, is to reduce expenditure and caseload by about 20%. Inevitably, in a new system, there will be winners and losers as changes to passporting criteria bed in, but we are very focused on maintaining eligibility, obviously with a particular focus on the most vulnerable, in order that we are able to protect entitlement as far as we possibly can. So I hope that's a useful update to the committee. I appreciate that it doesn't give all of the information because we are dependent to a large extent on the information flow from the DWP, but I will, as we have done previously, keep the committee updated as we progress further.
Thanks very much, Cabinet Secretary, and it is good to see that there is some shape emerging through the fog of the reforms, and that we can start to see the shape of some of the changes that are coming. Something that's been raised with me on a number of occasions by third sector groups in particular is the shape of the changes that are going to come in local authority passported benefits. You know, there's a whole array of them, and we've never actually had any sort of clarity around just what is delivered and what the criteria are at each local authority level. But have you had any discussions with COSLA or individual local authorities about what the knock-on impact would be in terms of local authority passported benefits where they set them themselves?
Well, The first part of my answer to that is yes, we're working very closely with COSLA. I mean, there's ongoing working arrangements in place and a very close and productive dialogue between ourselves and COSLA. We very much see ourselves as partners in this work. These reforms are not of the Scottish Government's making, nor are they of COSLA's making, and we've got to work together as much as possible to understand the impact. You're right that there are, if you take the blue badge, for example, DLA at the moment is a passporting benefit to a blue badge, and we are going to map that onto personal dependence payments. But there are other arrangements that local authorities have in place to govern entitlement to the blue badge scheme. And obviously we want to make sure that as many people as possible who currently are passported through the DLA will be passported through PIP. But, you know, as the DWP are trying to cut by 20%, inevitably some people are going to fall out of that benefit regime, and then we therefore have to have a very close eye on the impact on how people might then try to access that particular benefit through other arrangements. So that's one very concrete example. Our focus really, and this I think was encapsulated in the consultation, our focus is twofold. Firstly, it is to work through the transition to protect the entitlement to passported benefits of people who currently have access to passported benefits. And I think that's really important at a time of uncertainty and often damaging change for people. But secondly, and more longer term, is there an opportunity to look at the system of passported benefits, simplify that, make that more easy to understand, more easy to administer, and more easy to use for people. And you know, the consultation gave us some pointers on how we might want to do that for the medium to longer term.
Thank you, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, you mentioned once more the problem of a lack of information from the DWP, and that's hampering the finalisation of some of the criteria for passported benefits. I think my first observation can be this seems to be a very common theme. I think that's been something that you've reported to us every time you've visited. So it's obviously a source of frustration, doubtless for you and for the committee. Can I ask what sort of information that is required from the DWP, and is there any idea why it is still the case that they are unable to provide information that the Scottish Government requires?
I suppose you know, the first observation I would make, and it's not to try to defend the DWP, they're undergoing a massive change to the system, and it is a big change for those who are working to implement that. Obviously, it's not a change of our making, but nevertheless, they're undergoing that. I think there has, at times, I feel anyway, and this is certainly my strong feeling, is that there hasn't always been enough of an appreciation that the change that they're introducing has a massive knock-on effect, not just directly in terms of benefit recipients, but in terms of the services provided by devolved administrations and local authorities, and to go back to the convener's point about some of the passported benefits that local authorities administer. So there needs to be still needs to be an ongoing appreciation of the fact that there is that impact, and that in order for us to deal with that impact, we need to have a flow of information. In terms of some of the information we have now that we didn't have the last time I was here, we have a better idea of the kind of information that is likely to be on the Universal Credit Award Notice, information about people's income and earnings and how their universal credit amount is calculated. Now, that is the kind of information we need in order to start what effectively is a mapping exercise to take the current eligibility criteria for current passported benefits. For example, if job seekers allowance gets you onto a particular benefit, then where in the kind of threshold of income and universal credit would entitlement to that sit? We also are beginning to get, although this is not confirmed, we're beginning to get a better idea of the numbers of people who might migrate onto universal credit in the October to April next year period, which will inform our thinking, as I said earlier on, about our approach in that period. But there's still a lot of information around how the new rules will operate. If you take personal independence payments, for example, the numbers of people who are currently on DLA, how many of them will transfer over onto PIP, given that the background to all of this is a 20% cut, and some of the information about how the rules are going to be applied, what assumptions lie behind some of this, we don't yet have to allow us to model as effectively as we would want the impact, as well as some of the finer detail about the operation of the scheme that allows us to make final decisions about passported benefits. So I think it would be fair to say we are in receipt of more information now than we were the last time, but it continues to be an ongoing need to get that information flow operating as effectively and as quickly as possible.
When you raise this matter with the DWP, you know, these changes, and it's interesting the point you make that, you know, these are big changes and they're not of the Scottish Government choosing, but they are of essentially the DWP's choosing. So if they are making the changes, you think they'd be able to get their head around them a little bit better. But when you're raising the point that these changes have an impact on services that are administered by the Scottish Government, for example, or other devolved governments or local authorities, are you getting any sense that they're taking that on board?
Yes, to an extent. You know, I wrote to Lord Freud before Christmas. Minister for Housing and Welfare had an opportunity to raise some of these issues with Ian Duncan Smith. You know, I think it would be fair to say that there is at that level an appreciation that there's a big impact here for us, and we need information from the DWP in order to deal with that. The speed at which and the effectiveness with which that then translates into an actual flow of information is not always at the pace we would want it to be, because, you know, clearly the DWP are working to timescales, but they're timescales that the DWP are in control of. Now, I'm not saying this will happen, but it has in certain respects. Timescales have already been changed around the migration to PIP, for example. The time frame for that being completely operational has already slipped by a couple of years, I think. They're in control of that, so if they're running into problems, they can choose to extend a deadline. We don't have that ability. We have to meet the deadlines that are being set by the DWP. So in a sense, that the need for us to be sure that we have that information is all the greater, because we're not in control of the overall process. So we'll continue to work as constructively as we can with DWP, because it's better to do that and get the information that way. And I'll make sure that the committee is aware at any point if we feel a degree of frustration that we're not getting the information that we need.
One last question, Convener. I mean, obviously this additional information that you're pressing for, I mean, what's the response been? Have they given a commitment to get this to you in time?
We've not had a response to the letter. I last communicated with Lord Freud just before Christmas. I can't remember the date of the letter, but it was in the period just before Christmas. We've not had a response to that yet. I'm happy to furnish the committee with that letter and the response as soon as we've got it.
Followed by Alex.
Thank you, Convener. While this lack of information continues, and you're basically in stasis, Cabinet Secretary, there's a growing fear out there about the consequences of these reforms, and I think that probably all of the members and probably every parliamentarian in this place has come across that in recent times. Jamie was asking round about information. Is there any indication that the lack of information coming from the DWP is because they're having major difficulties with computer systems, as has been reported quite widely in some of the press?
I don't have the information I would need to answer that question. You know, that's a matter for the DWP. Suffice to say, they are introducing a massive change to the welfare system. I'm not sure, and again, this is just my opinion, I'm not sure that when they embarked on this, they fully appreciated the scale of the change that we're introducing against a background of cuts and a background of economic difficulty. And therefore, it wouldn't surprise me if they were running into some logistical challenges around all of that, including around the IT that's needed to support that. But I think you would probably need to get somebody from the DWP here to interrogate about some of the finer details of that.
If only we could, Cabinet Secretary, but
Indeed.
it seems that
Well,
the Secretary of State and Lord Freud will not, never want to meet this committee formally.
I hope that ministers in the UK government would agree to meet with this committee if the committee was requesting that they did so. This is a change that has huge implications for Scotland. This is a really important part, this committee is a really important part of the arrangements that Scotland collectively has put in place to try to deal with this. And I don't think it's acceptable for ministers not to engage with a parliamentary committee.
I could maybe expand on the lack of information and the possible problems that they're having with computer systems. Cabinet Secretary, if this kind of thing continues, and you've already said that there is already going to be a delay in the implementation of PIP, does that mean that it may well be that the interim arrangements that you are going to put in place may have to stay for much, much longer than originally anticipated?
Can I separate out, because it's important that we do that, arrangements for PIP and arrangements for universal credit. There's not a delay, as things stand just now, to the start of the introduction of personal independence payments. The time frame, though, for the complete migration to personal independence payments has been extended from, I think it was 2014-15 to 2017-18. But it will start in April, as was scheduled. So our planning for that needs to continue on the pace that it always was on. In terms of universal credit, there's a phased introduction. The period from April to October this year is a pathfinder part of the process, which will only involve a certain number of claimants in the Greater Manchester area, but we need to have plans in place for that in case anybody from the Greater Manchester area who's on universal credit moves to Scotland and would be seeking passported benefits in Scotland. That's likely to be very, very, very small numbers of people, obviously, if anybody, but we need to have arrangements in place. We then have the next phase of introduction from October through to April next year, where it's my best estimate at this stage, based on the information we do have, although it's not confirmed, is that relatively small numbers of people in Scotland will be on universal credit at that stage. But again, we need to have plans in place for those who are, to ensure that they can access universal credit. And then post-April, of course, the implementation picks up pace. I don't know, I can't sit here and say to the committee absolutely that will all proceed from the DWP's perspective on the timescale that they've set out, because they are in charge of that. What I need to do and what my responsibility is to make sure we have the plans in place to deliver our side of this, should that timescale continue on the path that has been set out for it.
Can I ask Cabinet Secretary, in terms of the lack of information that you're getting, and the convener and others have already mentioned the passported benefits that are dealt with by local authorities, do we know if the local authorities are getting any information at all from the DWP?
We're sharing all information with local authorities and vice versa, so I don't think there's any information that, to my knowledge, that local authorities would have that we don't have. We're, as I said to the convener earlier on, we're and have been since day one of this, working in a very collaborative way with local authorities.
Convener.
Alex, to be followed by Linda.
Thank you very much, Convener. I was looking at the responses to the Scottish Government's passported benefits consultation, and I noticed that a majority of respondents agreed with the principles set out by the Social Security Advisory Committee that underpin the reform to passported benefits, which were simplification, auto-entitlement, information transfer, and making work pay. I wanted to look at them. In the first instance, the issue of simplification. The Minister gave a commitment to simplifying the process in her opening remarks, yet if you look forward through the consultation, there's a lot of good ideas in there, but they're exactly the opposite of simplification. Do you see the principle of simplification as one that will be easily achieved within this process, or is it achievable within this process?
I hesitate to say that anything within a complicated welfare system will ever be easily achieved. I think simplification is, I think, an aspiration we should have in the medium to longer term. I mean, I should say our absolute focus just now is on this transition period. And, you know, that's not necessarily the position I would have chosen to be in, but it is the position I am in. So, you know, we've got to focus very much on, you know, making sure that as people migrate from one benefit to another, often, you know, in a very complicated process of transition, we are able to put in place the arrangements that will ensure that if they're getting a particular passported benefit just now, they will continue to have access to that under the new arrangements. And that is, you know, a very labour-intensive exercise, and we need to focus on that. So I think the scope for, you know, further, more strategic change, if you like, to the system of passported benefits has to come later, once we're sure we've got that transition under control. When we're at that stage, I do think there is an opportunity, and I've said to the committee before, you know, in the sense, I don't know whether it's trying to put a silver lining on the cloud of reform that many of us have got a lot of concerns about, but there's an opportunity to look at a system of passported benefits that has grown up in a very sporadic, very ad hoc way, is for people claiming them very complicated at times, difficult to understand. A lot of people, I mean, I'm struck by when I look at figures frequently for the number of people who are eligible for a particular passported benefit who won't take it up because they might not know about it or the process of getting it is too complicated. So I think we do have an opportunity to do that, but I think we've got to proceed with care because, you know, as I think Kevin Stewart said, there's a lot of people out there feeling under a lot of pressure and are very, very anxious about things that are very important to their ability to live independent lives. And I don't think we want to put into the middle of that some kind of further reform of passported benefits that increases that anxiety. So it is a more medium-term thing, and I'm sure this committee will be part of that discussion when we get to that, about how we might have a more strategic look at passported benefits and make them work better than they do at the moment.
Under the heading of information transfer, the previous two questioners have touched on the issue of information flow from the DWP. And in one of your answers, you yourself made some suggestions about the type of information that may be available relating to individual claimants when the process is up and running. Are you confident that the system is in place, or a system will be in place, that will allow the appropriate flow of information to take place on individual claimants? Or is there a requirement to address the system of information flow at an early point to ensure that we don't have a blockage in the system when information is required?
I think I probably have to answer that in different stages. In terms of the information flow between the DWP and the Scottish Government and COSLA just now about the operation of the new system that allows us then to put in place our consequential changes, you know, the system's in place for that. It doesn't take any great complication for them to...
What I'm talking about is when we get to the stage where we're looking for information to assess individuals. And
that's effectively what we need. What we're relying on the DWP, and as I said, we've got some more of this information now, to give us a very clear sense of what an individual claimant is, what information is going to be on the award notice of every individual claimant, which then allows us to know what kind of information we will have about that claimant's circumstances for us then to make the decisions we need to make about how the current system of criteria for access to passported benefits will map onto that new system. So, you know, we've got some more of that information just now. We don't have all of the information we need, and we need to continue to press the DWP for that. So I can't sit here right now and say those systems are in place because, well, apart from anything else, putting those systems in place will take secondary legislation going through the Parliament, which the committee will have the opportunity to scrutinise. But it's my absolute determination that we will have those systems in place to ensure continued access to passported benefits. But getting to that still requires some missing pieces of the jigsaw to be put in place by the DWP.
Are we absolutely sure that we're not in a position where, when the day comes that you require specific information about an individual, that when that request is made, the response is that no system exists or no agreement exists to transfer that information?
I'm not entirely sure I understand your question. I mean, I'm not, you know, we don't have a finalised system in place just now in terms of the operation of universal credit. So, you know, and it's not a system I am designing. The Scottish Government will be designing the follow-on from that system in terms of how we use the new system the DWP are putting in place to ensure access to passported benefits. But, you know, that system is not in place yet at either level in its final form. So we can't be absolutely sure it will be in place in a form that meets our requirements. But we're working very hard with DWP to ensure that they understand our requirements in order that we're able to do that and give that certainty at the point where individuals will be requiring to access or continue to access those benefits.
The final point is under the heading of making work pay, and regardless of some of the other principles, I'm sure that everybody agrees that work should pay, and that if anybody wants to become involved in work and reduce their benefit claim as a result, then that's a desirable situation to be in. Is there any circumstance in which you see the way that passported benefits are arranged in Scotland might actually work against that principle? or is there an ability on your part to ensure that passported benefits don't block the trend to encourage people into work?
I think we all want a system where work pays, and I would make, I suppose, give you an answer to that in two parts. Firstly, one of my big concerns about a lot of the change that the UK government is implementing is that while they say it's about making work pay, it's actually working against that. And this myth that these changes are all going to be felt by people who are, feckless, work shy and languishing in their bed all day, a significant chunk of the welfare changes being introduced by the government the impact of them will fall on people who are in working, who are striving really hard to provide a decent standard of living for their kids, and through things like changes to the child tax credits, the working tax credit, the benefit uprating, are going to find that a lot harder. So this is not the distinction between the strivers and the so-called scroungers that the UK government seems to want to think it is. This is actually about the UK government and many of these changes making life harder for people who are working very hard already. The second point about passported benefits, we want to make sure that the system of passported benefits is contributing to the ability of people to get into work and to make sure that they get the rewards of working. And again, many people who have passported benefits are people who are working. So, if you're working in a low-paid job, getting access to free school meals for your child is a really important, factor in you providing for your child. So, let's not assume, because it would be wrong to say, I'm not saying you are, that passported benefits are all going to people who are out of work and are, making it more likely that they're stuck in a benefit trap and unable to get into work. That's not the case. These passported benefits, to a large extent, are going to people who are working hard, but working hard in low-paid jobs.
So, finally, if you believe that some of the UK government's welfare reforms are counterproductive when compared with the objectives that they set out to achieve, do you believe you and your government are in a better position to achieve these objectives through what you can do in Scotland?
If we were independent, yes, we'd be in a far stronger position. Or, even if we had powers over the welfare system, we'd be able to design a welfare system that no doubt would still have its critics and still have its anomalies and still have its things that people would want to improve, but we could design a welfare system that actually was likely to meet our objectives, which, to summarise, in my view, are firstly about ensuring that people do have the ability to get into work and earn a good living for being in work and get the benefits of working hard, and secondly, that we protect the vulnerable. Because the other big group of people here that are being affected by these changes are disabled people who, frankly, have got enough to cope with in their lives very often without having the added anxiety of, having their benefits taken away from them. So, yes, I think if we had these powers in Scotland, we would use them to design a welfare system that is much more fit for purpose than the one that we've got at the moment and the one we're likely to have as a result of these changes.
So while you disagree about the method, you agree with the objectives?
I've always said that, to the extent that the UK government has said they want to simplify the welfare system and they want to make work pay, I've never disagreed with those objectives. I'm on record many times as saying I agree with those objectives. My big fight with the UK government over this is that many of the changes that they're introducing are running completely counter to those stated objectives, actually making the system, I think it was it the IFS last week who talked about the incoherence that the changes to child benefit added to the introduction of universal credit were going to inject into the welfare system, a system that many people would already say lacks coherence. So I'm not sure they're succeeding in terms of making the system more simple. They're certainly not succeeding, in my view, in making work pay, because by taking benefits away from people who are in work, they're actually making it a lot harder for some people who are in work and trying to get on. The 1% cap on tax credits, for example, for people in work has been estimated to be equivalent to about a 4% real terms reduction. That's not helping people in work, that's doing the exact opposite of that.
3 final questions in there. Linda.
Thank you, Convener. Back to information and data. We've talked about collecting that and transfer of that. But once that happens, that data has to be managed. And I read in the responses to the consultation that there are still big concerns about data protection. Are there discussions going on about protecting the position of workers in the various places who, for ease of administration, should be sharing information, but who may not be at all clear about their own position? And of course, the resultant potential effect that can have on claimants.
Yeah, I mean, data protection, I think, is an important aspect of this. It's perhaps not a kind of aspect of it that's been discussed too much at this committee before, but it's something that we are discussing with DWP, how we protect people's information, and they are alert to that, and we'll continue to discuss that with them. I'm happy to provide more of a briefing to the committee if it would be helpful around the data protection issues, because I appreciate they're not the ones that we usually focus on when we're having these particular discussions.
And sort of moving on from that, I was also in reading the summary of the section about passported benefits and who's entitled, etc. Those who are not, on benefit. What we talked about earlier, being able to access some of the passported ones, and there was a feeling that there had to be a very strong information campaign. And I noticed again, back to the data protection issue, that people were suggesting things like using GP and hospital medical records, etc., which again flagged up warning lights to me about data protection and the right to people's privacy, social work assessments, identification via the pension service. So bearing all that in mind and the care that has to be taken, have there been discussions too with government and with local government about how we can properly get the information out there so that people can be assured of what they're entitled to, whether it's free school lunches for the children, whether it's a blue badge?
I think, again, I'm happy to provide sort of written detail of the nature and extent of these discussions. We're discussing all aspects of this with COSLA in particular, and obviously we've already touched on discussions with DWP. I think awareness raising around passported benefits is important, and these changes, while many of us don't agree with the changes that are being made, nevertheless they give us the opportunity to raise awareness and explain to people and give people information about the range and nature of passported benefits that are available. I would like, for example, to see the Universal Credit Award Notice signal that access to universal credit may trigger access to other benefits, and I think that's something that is certainly there as a possibility. I think we as government and local government have an obligation as well to make sure that we are doing what we can to make people aware of the range of benefits that are available. I think I said earlier on, if you take the Blue Badge scheme, for example, which is the one I keep mentioning because it relates to PIP, so it's at a kind of earlier stage of our thinking in terms of the changes we have to make. Many people who are entitled through DLA to a Blue Badge don't ever access it now. Some of them may not want it, some of them may not need it, but nevertheless a lot of people probably don't access it because they don't know about it. So I think it's important that people understand what they're entitled to. There'll also be the knock-on effect of if some people are dropping out of disability benefit as a result of these changes and lose their entitlement passported through their benefit, what other ways would they be able to access? In the example I'm using, the Blue Badge scheme, and we need to make sure people are aware of that as well. So there is an obligation on us to make sure that we're raising awareness, but there's also an opportunity as we go through these changes to do that.
Annabelle.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I would say just at the outset of my remarks that I have to agree entirely with my colleague Kevin Stewart when he said that really the refusal thus far of UK government ministers to engage formally with this committee I think shows real discourtesy, Convener, to this committee, and certainly doesn't bode well for the so-called respect agenda that the UK government seem to be so keen to talk about but not actually act upon. But if I could ask the Cabinet Secretary to provide some information, if she can, about the anticipated role of the Scottish Government's Welfare Expert Working Group recently announced. Obviously, I understand that it will be having a key role with respect to the independence debate in terms of designing a welfare system, indeed, as the Cabinet Secretary has already referred to this morning, that suits our objectives here in Scotland, that's fit for purpose, that's made in Scotland for Scotland. But could the Cabinet Secretary indicate whether this working group will also be looking at these kind of issues we've been discussing this morning?
I mean, the group I announced on Sunday, I think has an important role to play. Part of its remit is, to some extent, separate from what we're talking about here and would be important, notwithstanding the welfare reform agenda. Another part of its remit is very relevant to the reform agenda, and I'll come on to both of them in a second. I should say I announced yesterday an additional member of that group, Lynn Williams, who will serve on that group as in a personal capacity, but she of course works for SCVO. She has a very strong third sector expertise to bring to that, as well as a very strong record on carers issues. The initial group was selected not to be representative of any particular interest group, but to capture a range of experience. There was a point made that I thought was fair, that there should be a woman, somebody with third sector and carer representation on that, and I was happy to listen to that and respond accordingly. In terms of the group's remit, the first aspect of the remit, which to a large extent is separate from what we're talking about, involves the preparation the Scottish Government is doing for the eventuality of a yes vote in the referendum next year. We need to make sure that we've done the work, the modelling, made the right assumptions about the transition to an independent welfare system. So the first part of the work of the group will be to look at the assumptions and the work we're doing around the cost of delivering a welfare system in an independent Scotland, and give us assurance that that work is properly grounded, or to advise us on how we might improve the work that we're doing there. And that's a very important part of the government's preparations for the referendum and beyond. The second part of the remit, and I should say this initially is a very short-term remit for this group. I've asked them to give me some initial recommendations for what would be the areas for priority change to the UK system in order to fulfil our objectives of a system that is fairer and does make work pay. Now, I should say that's a difficult thing to ask any group to do, because we're dealing with a welfare system that is in itself in a period of transition. We don't yet have the final blueprint for exactly how that scheme will work, which is why I've deliberately asked them at this stage to give me some initial recommendations, which will then inform our further thinking of what we would want to do differently in terms of designing a welfare system for Scotland that fulfilled our objectives.
Any other questions, Cabinet Secretary? So thanks very much for that contribution this morning. I'm sure you'll keep us informed as you promised in terms of the developments, and it's been appreciated that you've managed to do that for us so far, and it's very welcome. Okay. But thank you very much for your contribution this morning. Thank you. Yeah, I'll suspend for a couple of minutes to give us some time to prepare for the next agenda item. Our second piece of business today is consideration of an SSI. It's the Council Tax Reduction State Pension Credit Scotland Regulations 2012, SSI 2012-319. This set of regulations relates to the establishment of a scheme for the reduction of council tax liability and apply to people who have reached the qualifying age for state pension credit. Members have before them a copy of the regulations and an extract from the Subordinate Legislation Committee report. The report of that committee draws attention to some matters about the clarity of the drafting of the instrument and a number of minor drafting errors. Members may wish to note that the Scottish Government has undertaken to bring forward amending regulations to correct some of the points identified by the Subordinate Legislation Committee. If any member wants to make any comments on the regulations, now is the time to do so, although not any indications prior to this morning's meeting that there are any comments or recommendations. So are members content with to note the regulations?
Yep.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks very much. Agenda item 3 is the European Reporter. This is an item in relation to the appointment of a committee member to act as a European Reporter as required by Rule 12.2 of Standing Orders. I would ask if any member wishes to volunteer to be appointed for this role.
I certainly don't want to volunteer. I'd be interested to know if if anyone on the committee, convener or perhaps among the Clarkin team, could tell us what the role of a European reporter to this committee might be.
I think we have had some discussion about this because we are required to have one. But I think in terms of the responsibilities for social security and things like that, there is very little. But there may be issues that could come up in terms of disability issues, rights issues or what have you, that a European reporter might have a viable input into. So I think there is, we have to have it, but I do think there is merit in having it here.
There may also be, convener, you know, I mean, again, it's sort of striving to see, but it can't be ruled out that there could potentially be, I mean, at the EU level, you know, there might be arrangements in place for recognition of mutual recognition of rights of EU citizens in other countries at the level of social security issues. Now, whilst that at the moment is a reserved matter, as we have seen some movement of powers to Scotland on a limited basis in this general area, it could be that there could be an impact in that context at the EU level, and hence we would need a EU reporter.
But given that we've touched on the areas, I would assume that the description of a European Union reporter would mean it specifically excludes ACHR issues.
I'm not saying that we want to exclude anything, but I think technically you're probably right, Alec, but that does not mean that if a discussion came up in that regard that a European reporter could not have an input into it.
Can I suggest we don't worry about it? At the end of the day, you've made the point we need to have one, so should not just get on with it.
I'm very happy to volunteer.
Hey,
Thanks very much, Linda. I think by the sounds of the rest of the committee members, that's agreed. Okay. Thanks very much, Linda. I hope it's not too onerous a task for you. But thanks very much for putting yourself forward to do that. Agenda item 4 is the Scottish Law Commission bills. We've always seen the letter from the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee regarding the rate of implementation of bills arising from Scottish Law Commission reports. The SPPA Committee has indicated that we'd welcome written comments on 4 questions as set out in paragraph 9. The members have any comments on the letter from the SPPA? If you've got any comments, we can formulate them into a letter. If not, we can just write back and say that we don't have any comments. Again, no one's indicated before this morning that there were any issues. But Annabelle, if you've got something you want to...
Sorry, I'll bear that in mind for future meetings. But just 2 points. One is they do seek input on a series of options as regards how the determination is made in this new system of whether a matter should go to the Sub-Leg Committee. And one option is to have it go to the Parliamentary Bureau, as at present would happen. And I think of the 3 options presented, that makes most sense. I think if it were to go to a committee to be discussed, whether or not that committee, I think you're losing quite a bit of time. And if the objective here is to try to find a way to implement more quickly Scots Law Commission, Scottish Law Commission bills that are not controversial, then I think if you did the committee route, you know, you would be losing some weeks, if not months, whereas if you went the Bureau route, it seems to be a more speedy option. And the other point I would make, but I'm not trying to be difficult here, but, you know, it is quite a change, it would be quite a change to the remit of the Sublege Committee, and it would beg the question, I would have thought, if the title, therefore, of the Sublege Committee was still pertinent, if it assumed jurisdiction for this work.
Handy having a lawyer on the committee.
It does indeed. Yeah. Well, you don't have to inform us in advance. It's just that sometimes the clerks are made aware that the committee members have got issues, but you don't have to. I mean, this is the opportunity to raise any points. Given that Annabelle's raised those points, do members agree with them, or would they prefer that?
Absolutely agree with them.
Well, yeah, and plus the point, correct me if I'm completely wrong here, Annabelle, because I may well be, you know, but the fact that the Sublege Committee is a standing committee under the Scotland Act, is it as simple as just giving them something, you know, an extra remit that is, as Annabelle Ewing says? I don't know.
That can be done by change to standing orders, though. They did do that with the...
Even though it's a statutory committee?
I think it can be done,
Can
but I don't know too much either. So
well,
I think we should just
it
agree
was
with
just to
Annabelle.
throw that into the pot. It's not something...
I'm reliably informed that it can be done.
Right, oh well.
So, if we can just flag up then, the comments that Annabelle has made, if members are content, we could write them up into a letter back to the SPPA and say that that's our comments in respect to the letter.
I think it's a very worthwhile exercise because, you know, there's a huge frustration that we can't deal more expeditiously with Scottish Law Commission suggestions, and I think this is a very innovative and flexible suggestion and makes sense. But as I say, the title then of the committee becomes a bit questionable.
Well, it's certainly something that they have to consider if you flag it up to them, so I think the point's well made. Okay. It'll be up to them to decide what they do in respect of it, but it's a point that's well made, and I think we can reflect that in a letter to them. Okay. So with that business, that ends today's meeting. Thanks everyone for their attendance this morning.